All right, we're going to start. I don't know why I went there. I don't care about that. So, I wrote this entire sermon before I realized what I wanted to. I didn't even know what to call it. So, here's the thing. Sometimes you'll just start like thinking about something God's doing, and you'll just start working things out with Him. So what I call this is love everyone. You never know where it will take you. What do you guys think? You think that's true? Yeah. We're going to start with, I'm going to talk to you about prostitute. Did you hear what I just said? Yes. I'm going to talk to you about a prostitute, a hooker, a harlot. What the Bible called her. Bad people, right? Who would agree with me that a prostitute, a hooker, a harlot is a bad person? I'm not real sure. I know they're doing bad things. Check it out. Back in the Old Testament, there was this city that was wicked called Jericho. And their people were full of Canaanites. The Canaanites did all kinds of crazy stuff. Like they had these two different gods. One was Baal and one was called Asher. Baal was supposed to be a male and Asher was supposed to be a female. And what they would do to worship them is they would have sex. Like the prostitutes and the priests would have sex. And they thought if they did that then the gods would have sex and fertilize the ground. Right? And then if that didn't work, they would start cutting themselves. And then if that didn't work, they would wind up like sacrificing their firstborn sons. Just to give you a little idea of who we're dealing with. So this lady was named Rahab. Rahab was this prostitute or harlot that lived in the city of Jericho. And these two dudes from the Israelites, they were spies. They were sent in. So you didn't know God had spies, right? We don't think about like God. Listen, God loves you. God is a loving God and He loves people. But He also is very tactical. Who knows what tactical means? Tactical means like in the military tactics means it's like how you're going to do things to win. He's tactical. Okay, so these two spies come in, and they're like trying to figure out how the mood is in Jericho, how the people are feeling. And Rahab's like, I know you guys serve the living God. So I'm going to hide you in my house, and I'm going to help you get out of the city, but I want you to remember me. So she's like bargaining with them, like to give her safe passage after the Israelites take the city, because she knows it's coming. She's already heard about this God of the Israelites. See, here's the thing, guys. Back in the Old Testament, those people groups around the Israelites, they heard about the God of the Israelites. They heard about this God that like took an entire ocean and separated it so that His people could cross on dry land. And then when the enemy come after them, He let the waters loose and it drowned the enemy. They heard these stories. They heard all these crazy stories about this God of the Israelites, and they were afraid of them. They were afraid of them because their God was who He was. Now I'm here to tell you, one time I worked down in, I'm getting a little bit off here, but one time I worked down in Florida. It was right before me and Jenny got married. And I worked with this guy from Haiti. And in Haiti, they practice voodoo. You guys know what voodoo is, right? A little doll, dummy, you poke it with needles, right? And people are supposed to feel it, right? So I was talking to him, and he knows I'm a Christian. So I'm kind of talking to him about that. I think he was a believer. I don't really remember exactly, but as I'm talking to this guy, he's like, it's crazy. The first rule in voodoo is do not try to do a spell against a Christian because it will come back on you 7 times. Now, the reason I bring that up, guys, that was like 20 years ago. Okay? 20 years ago, people outside this country still knew you don't mess with the God of the Christians. To this day, people understand that. That the God of the Christians, which is the same God as the Israelites, he is nothing to be messed with. Rahab knew that. She knew it was coming. So she bartered for safe passage. Let me get this back up. All right. So this is where it gets a little crazy. Rahab, after she leaves the city, like the Israelites, sure enough, they come in. They conquer the city. They spare Rahab. She's a harlot. But they spare her anyway because they said they would. She winds up like deciding, I'm just going to live with the Israelites. Because their God, I want their God to be my God. Right? So that's what she did. So Rahab wound up getting married to this guy named Solomon. And then they wound up having this son, and they named him Boaz. Now, who has known somebody or is somebody that from a little bit of a shady family? Me too. Folks, my family is a little shady. I got a sister that went to prison. When I went in the CHP Academy, she went to prison. I went to be a law enforcement officer. She went to prison for making and selling meth. So I get having shady people in my family. Okay? We all got shady people in our family, or we are the shady people in our family. One or the other. Right? Alright. Play that video. I want you guys to check this video out here. If you can't get where you can see it, this is going to give you a brief description of the book of Ruth.
It's a brilliant work of theological art, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are 3 main characters in the book: Naomi the widow, Ruth the Moabite, and Boaz the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line: in the days when the judges ruled. And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And so in search of food, they moved on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry 2 Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they died too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she knows that the life of an unmarried foreign widow in Israel is going to be very hard. And so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi. And she says, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. And so the 2 of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth discussing where they're going to find food. And it just so happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out to look for food, and it just so happens that she ends up picking grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who just so happens to be Naomi's relative. We're told that Boaz is a man of noble character, and he notices Ruth. And so after finding out more about her story, he shows remarkable generosity to her. He makes these special provisions so that the immigrant Ruth can gather grain in his field. And in doing so, Boaz is actually obeying an explicit command of the Torah to show generosity to the immigrant and the poor. Boaz is so impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, he prays for her that God will reward her for her boldness. So Ruth comes home that day, And Naomi finds out that she met Boaz, and she is thrilled. She says Boaz is their family redeemer. Now, this family redeemer thing, this was a cultural practice in Israel where if a man in the family died and he left behind a wife or children or land, it was the family redeemer's responsibility to marry that widow, to take up the land and protect that family. So Naomi, she begins to hope that perhaps there might still be a future for her family. Chapter 3 begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice their situation. So Ruth is going to stop wearing clothes of a grieving widow, and she's going to show signs that she's available to be married. And so Ruth goes to meet Boaz on the farm that night. And as she approaches, Boaz wakes up and he's totally startled. And Ruth makes her intentions very clear. She asks if Boaz will redeem Naomi's family and marry her. Boaz is once again amazed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her family, and he calls Ruth a woman of noble character. It's the same term used to describe the woman in Proverbs 31. So Boaz tells Ruth to wait until the next day, and he will redeem both Ruth and Naomi legally before the town elders. And so the chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi, and they marvel together at all of these recent events. In chapter 4, it all comes together. It turns out, at the last minute, Boaz discovers there is a family member who's closer to Naomi than he is, and he's actually eligible before him to redeem the family. But at the last second, this family member finds out that he's going to have to marry Ruth, the Moabite, and so he declines. But Boaz, remember, he knows Ruth's true character, and so he acquires the family property of Naomi, and he marries Ruth. And so just at the beginning, how Ruth was loyal to Naomi's family, so now Boaz is loyal to Naomi's family as well. The story concludes with a reversal of all of the tragedies from chapter 1. So the death of the husband and the sons is reversed as Ruth is married again and gives birth to a new son, granting joy to Naomi. And this symmetry between the opening and the closing, it's even more remarkable. So remember, the opening tragedy was followed by a great act of loyalty on the part of Ruth. And that is now matched by Boaz's act of loyalty that leads to the family's final restoration. And this symmetry, it highlights the design of the internal chapters as well. So each of the chapters begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan for their future. And that's followed by a providential meeting between Ruth and Boaz. And each chapter concludes with Naomi and Ruth rejoicing at what's taken place. This story is beautifully designed. And that design actually connects with a really interesting feature of the story. And that's how little God is mentioned. Right? The characters talk about God a few times, but the narrator actually never once mentions God doing anything directly in the story. And that's its brilliance. Because God's providence is at work behind every scene of this story, weaving together the circumstances and choices of all these characters. So Naomi, her tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, but actually the whole story is about God's mission to restore her and her family. And he's doing so through Ruth, through her boldness and loyalty, which brings healing to Naomi's life, but not without Boaz, who's a no-nonsense farmer who's full of generosity and loyalty. And so God uses his integrity combined with Ruth's boldness to save Naomi and her family. And so this story brilliantly explores the interplay of God's purposes and will with human decision and will. God weaves together the faithful obedience of his people to bring about his redemptive purposes in the world. And that leads to the real end of the story. The book of Ruth concludes with a genealogy, showing how Boaz and Ruth's son, Obed, was the grandfather of King David, from whom came the lineage of the Messiah. And so all of a sudden, these seemingly mundane, ordinary events in this story are woven into God's grand story of redemption for the whole world. And so the book of Ruth invites us to consider how God might be at work in the very ordinary, mundane details of our lives as well. And that's what the book of Ruth is all about.
Did you guys get all that? I love this story. The book of Ruth you can read in about 20 minutes, 25. It's not very long at all. You guys get a chance, you should read it. One of the things I really thought was neat about it is Remember there at the end when it said that Ruth and Boaz, they had a son. And that son was the grandfather of King David. Okay? And King David is in the lineage, so he's an ancestor of Jesus. That means Jesus is great, however many grandmother was a prostitute or a harlot. Okay? Ruth was a Moabitess. In Moab, they did all kinds of bad stuff too. So I wonder sometimes about, what I love about this story is I wonder about, you think when Boaz was growing up, so Boaz's mom, remember, is Rahab. Do you think when Boaz was growing up, and I want you guys to talk back to me here, do you think when Boaz was growing up that people talked about his mom behind his back?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you think?
Probably.
Probably. What do you think other people, you think they were like talking about her like, hey, did you hear about Boaz's mom, dude? She's so nice. She's such a righteous lady. What do you think? They're probably talking some bad stuff, huh? And I'll bet, I am speculating here. Okay, so this is not in the Bible. This is just what Dan thinks, okay? But I'll bet there were a lot of people that talked bad about his mother. And I'll bet because of that, and because he knew where she came from, it softened his heart for Ruth. Because Ruth was a foreigner. Ruth came from a different culture, different background. Who knows somebody from a different culture or background? Who knows somebody that is, say, from India? So here's the thing. We live in a small town here. There's not very many people here that are not from really close to here, or at least California. You know what I mean? Jaime's one that's not from around here. Where are you from, Hall? El Salvador, that's right. So I'll bet Jaime's got some cultural things that we'd be like, that's different. It'd be different for us. The reason I bring all that up, guys, is because we've been talking about how we're supposed to treat each other. And I think a lot of times what happens is we look at people and we look at either their culture or their background or, let's just say it like it is, or their skin tone, or maybe their social status. You know, hey, when I was you guys' age, a lot of my friends, their dad worked at Ford Motor Company. So they drove really nice vehicles. Like, their parents always had brand new cars. The newest truck that I can remember my dad getting before I turned 18 would have been about 20 years old at the time. So that was the new truck. My dad drove pickup trucks that, I kid you not, you could stick your whole arm through the fender. It was rusted out so bad. We never had a lot of extra money. Things were tight. But the reason I say that is because I think sometimes it's easy for us to look at people that are different than us and think they're less. Or God's not going to use them. Or God's not going to use them like us. Or maybe we should keep our distance from them or something like that. Would you guys agree with that? You guys, who's ever seen the homeless dude? He's got a sign that says homeless down at Walmart.
Which one?
So he's like a Hispanic looking guy.
Oh, yeah.
Just so you know, he's not homeless. I know where he lives. But my point is that when we look at a guy like that, let me ask you, would you be more more likely to walk up to a person that looks like me, or like Derek, or like Jaime, somebody that's clean, look like they took a bath today, and talk to them about the Lord, or somebody look like that? We can be honest with ourselves right here. What is it? Right? The Lord's really been stirring on my heart lately about God came for the poor and the lowly. And even if you're not physically poor, you can have a lot of money and be poor in your spirit. You can have a lot of money and everything going wrong. You can have a fancy house on a hill and driving brand new trucks and brand new cars and have sports cars and boats and jet skis and quads and everything else and be completely unhappy. Inside, you can be completely devastated. And I think about, there was this lady that she's went on to be with the Lord now. But there was this lady, man, that we knew that every tax season she'd give us a big old check. And then when she got her taxes back, she would give the youth a big check. And when anytime during the year, if she got like a decent, larger sum of money for her family, she would always give the youth some. Man, she lived with some shady folks. Like their whole family, shady. Super shady. I would go over there sometimes. Like one time I went over there, and they know I'm a youth pastor, right? I walk in and they're smoking weed in the backyard. I mean, just like letting it have it. Hey, Pastor Dan. I'm like, it's nuts, man. They also know I'm a police officer. Like super shady. That lady, every chance she got, she was trying to lead shady people to the Lord. Because God don't care if you're shady. Rahab was shady. Boaz, I don't know. The Bible did say he was like prominent. But his mom's shady. I'll bet they thought she was shady too. Can you pull up Isaiah 56 for me? And one of you guys read this for me. Read it.
Don't let foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord say, the Lord will never let me be part of his people. And don't let the eunuchs? Don't let the eunuchs say, I'm a dried up tree with no children or no future. But this is what the Lord says, I will bless those eunuchs who keep my Sabbath days holy, and who choose to do what pleases me and commit their lives to me. I will keep them within the walls of my house, a memorial and a name, far greater than sons and daughters could give. For the name I give them is an everlasting one, it will never disappear. I will also bless the foreigners who commit themselves to the Lord, who serve him and love his name, who worship him and do not desecrate the Sabbath day of rest, and who hold fast to my covenant.
A little bit more, buddy.
I will bring them to my holy mountain of Jerusalem and will fill them with joy in my house of prayer. I will accept their burnt offerings and sacrifices, because my temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations. To the sovereign Lord, who brings back the outcasts of Israel, say, I will bring others too, besides my people Israel. Isaiah 56, 3-8.
So here's the thing, guys. We got this like really weird social stuff going on right now. It's like, I believe that you should if you come across the border, that you should come across it correctly. I think you should do it the right way legally, okay? With that being said, that does not give us a place to treat people that came across it illegally bad. Now, when I say treating them bad, I'm not saying don't tell them they did it wrong. I don't mean that. But God loves every nation, right? Right there it said the foreigner. Right there it said that he wants to take the foreigner and make them part of his house. So you have to kind of, you have to make sure that you're loving everybody, guys. When Christ told us to like love everybody, he meant everybody. That doesn't mean you got to agree with somebody. To love somebody, you do not have to condone what they are doing. You understand that? You don't have to say that's okay to do when they're openly doing something wrong. But you shouldn't be treating them bad either. In my mind, when I read the book of Ruth, what I see is I see this dude that saw probably people treat his mom bad. And because of that, he had grace and mercy towards somebody else that was different. And because of that, God honored that. He honored that, and out of him came a king. And out of that came the King of Kings. And that's pretty awesome. I don't know about you, it excites me. When you guys get home, I want you to read 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13 is called the love chapter. 1 Corinthians 13. If you can't remember that, remember the love chapter. If you Google the love chapter in the Bible, it's going to come up, 1 Corinthians 13. Just read through it. I particularly like the Message in the New Living Translation. It kind of breaks it down a little bit better. Guys, we got to love one another. Jesus, if Boaz didn't have mercy and grace and show love to to Ruth, who knows what would have happened, right? The thing is you know the other kinsman redeemer that I talked about? You guys know what I'm talking about? You remember? That other kinsman redeemer, you know why he didn't want to redeem? Because he would have had to give up his inheritance to redeem theirs. Jesus is our kinsman redeemer. He gave up his inheritance so that we could have one. We get his inheritance, basically. Okay? So read Ruth. It's super duper. And read the love chapter in the Bible. Next week, we're going to see what else we can find. I got some other stuff I want to go through. All right.